Hello, everybody. This is Carol Maletta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. The notion of creating diversity has been around a while, and usually that has meant organizations made a push to hire women here and there, sprinkling in some people of color to check the boxes. Once the new hires arrived, there were sometimes half-hearted efforts or no effort at all to really bring them into the fold where they could make a real difference and be fairly and equitably rewarded for the contributions they were making. Now, we've been hearing a lot more lately about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives launched by companies, product marketers, nonprofit organizations, you name it. And some organizations are talking a good game, but still, I just checking the boxes. In other cases, leaders have a real recognition that extraordinary energy, innovation, and momentum come when people of varying backgrounds, lived experiences, perspectives, and talents are not only allowed in the building, they are heard, they take up space, and they have a seat at the table. So making this paradigm shift with adults can be pretty challenging. There's intentionality and a lot of learning and possibly some unlearning that needs to take place to create a culture that nurtures the core values of true diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's where today's guest comes in. I'm talking about Minda Harts. She is a noted speaker, author, DE&I consultant, and podcaster. She is frequently called in to help organizations create an equitable workplace culture, managing and maximizing diverse talent, and also she speaks and consults on leadership development for executives and women. She's been featured in Time Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and more, and has appeared on The Morning Joe and other platforms. She is also an author of several books, one of which is You Are More Than Magic, The Brown and Black Girl's Guide to Finding Your Voice. Now, I think work with young girls of color is critical because, as I said, changing the culture of the organization or infusing a startup with a culture that embraces diversity, promotes inclusion, and practices equity is tricky with adults who have established mindsets. Giving youth the tools to advocate for themselves while relating courageously and confidently with others, those who look like them and those who don't, bodes well for a more evolved and enlightened workforce down the road. So allow me to welcome Minda Harts.
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you again so much for joining me. And so, you have quite of an expansive platform. So why don't you tell our viewers and listeners a little bit more? Maybe I left something out about what you do.
Well, I appreciate the introduction. And, basically, my goal is just to make the workplace better than I found it, right? I spent 15 years in my former life in corporate America as a consultant, and I was always the only woman many times, but more so the only Black woman or woman of color in the room. And you start to feel that feeling of isolation. And I realized that, you can be the only one, but do you have equity, right? Do you still have the same opportunities as others? And I think that two things can be true at the same time. We can work with people who never experienced discrimination, and then some of us experience it each and every day. And so it's really important for us to talk about the lived experiences of people, even if it's not our own, so that we can all help make these spaces that we inhabit better.
Yes. That's quite a mission that you have, and it's very, very much needed. I want to talk a bit more because you've written some other books too, and that's how I first learned about you when I saw the memo, for example. So tell us a bit more about the books you've written and what their focus is.
Yeah. So my first book was called The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. And I really birthed that book out of years and years of pain and frustration of being the only woman of color in the room, and people not acknowledging some of our experiences and some of this discrimination. Prior to some of the racial reckoning that's happening in the country, race was not a topic of conversation that people wanted to talk about, right? And so for me, it was almost like I had to hide myself in many cases, or I couldn't talk about some of the experiences I had, because then I would be looked at as the person that's creating a problem that's not there, right? And so I just dealt with that frustration for so long. And I said, you know what? Even as women, we don't experience the workplace the same. And most of the business books and career books that were out there were really from a lens of one particular demographic. And so I said, well, what would it look like if I wrote a book from my perspective, right? Being a Black woman, a woman of color in the workplace, so that other women of color could see themselves in a career narrative. And so representation is very important. And so the memo, if you could imagine, was one of the first books by a major publisher about the experiences of women of color in the workplace. And that first edition came out in 2019. So so for me, it was really important just to give voice to our experiences. And then my second book came out a few years later called Right Within, How to Heal from the Trauma that many of us have experienced. And then my third book, most recent book, I realized, you know what, we need some talking points before we get to the workplace. What about our young girls? And so You Are More Than Magic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But what I'm curious about is, I know that the memo was really about amplifying or shedding light on the experience of women of color in the workplace. But I'm just wondering what you've heard from people who are not women of color, who have read the book, and what the impact was on them after reading it.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I wasn't sure. I was very scared, Carol, to put this book out in the world because there wasn't another book out on the shelves like it. So I'm like, ooh, how are people going to adjust to it? Because I didn't want it just to be women of color reading it, but I wanted our managers, our colleagues, allies, that work with us. I wanted them to read it too, so that they have an understanding of what it's like to either manage us, work with us, or work for us. And so I was hopeful that not just women of color were going to read it, but that, those who don't identify that way would read it too. And to my surprise, thank God, it became a bestseller, not because just Black and brown women read the book, but because white men and women, men of color, lots of different people read it, because they also saw themselves in the book, but then they saw how they could activate their allyship or be better managers. And funny enough, last week I was traveling for a conference, and I had a woman that works at Boeing. She said their CEO, who is a white woman, constantly tells people they should be reading the memo. And I was shocked.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, I was shocked, but that it is getting out there in the world. And that's what I wanted to happen.
That's good. That's good. And I think, so often people feel like, white people, or, non-Black and brown people feel like they're doing us a favor with, oh, but we're not thinking about your color. And it's like, well, then you're really not thinking about me. And so that's what I love about the fact that they're reading the book, because it really does matter. There is a different perspective. And aside from growing up in a small town, big town, north, south, whatever, big city, our color is also, it's just an integral part of who we are. And so to take our color off the table is taking off a very essential element of ourselves. So I'm glad to hear that so many are reading the book and learning from it. So now let's talk about your book, More Than Magic. Let's start with the title, why you selected that title and what you were hoping to do with that book.
Yeah, so You Are More Than Magic is my first young adult book. And I started just to think about the younger me, so what did 15-year-old Minda need to hear? What did 12-year-old Minda need to hear? What did 18-year-old Minda need to hear? And I realized that some of the early experiences that I had were actually impacted the ways I was showing up as an adult. So I wanted to be able to go back in the future and be able to talk to my younger self and others around that age point. And so I took You Are More Than Magic because I think we use this, everybody's heard it, Black girl magic, right? It's a phrase that's everywhere and it's very endearing, but I wanted to say, you know what, we're actually more than that. It takes a lot for us to get to where we are. And it's not luck, it's not magic, it's grit, it's determination, it's, perseverance. And so I wanted to just show that we are more than these kind of fun little cute things, that we are human.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to tell you, when Black Girl Magic, became popular and started to gain traction, I was like, I just have a problem with that word, because it is negating the work and the courage and just all of the facets of our existence that go into us showing up, our young girls at school and women in corporations and government offices, academia, wherever they are. There's a whole lot, and it's not magic. It wasn't handed down to us, just gifted to us, and we're walking in it. It takes a lot of work. So it took a minute for me to even accept that and use the hashtag and all of that other stuff, because it's more than magic, as you say. So
it's way more. And I wanted our girls to know that, but I wanted society to know too. It's way more than magic. If it was, we wouldn't even need these books out here like this.
Right. And have you, what have you been hearing from the young girls? What have they been saying about this book and how they're using it and what it means for them?
Yeah, it's been such a blessing to be able to meet young girls. I was really nervous initially to write a young adult book, because I'm like, wait, am I cool enough? Am I too old, writing to young girls? And but I've actually had a lot of teachers reading the book, and educators and parents. And so they're inviting me to schools and doing fireside chats where the students interview me in assembly. And so it's just been really awesome to hear a lot of the experiences that adult women that read the memo were experienced, like authenticity, how to show up in the workplace, how to advocate for yourself, are the same things that the young girls are talking to me about. How do we show up as our authentic self? How do we advocate for ourselves? They use different words, but it's all pretty much the same questions and wanting to show up. And so it's just been so awesome to meet them and hear them and just experience how they feel about the book, and they're really enjoying it. So it's just been fun to see it at the public libraries, and just allowing educators, again, who are buying it for their students. And I'll have educators send me pictures of their students reading the book, and it's just been really cool.
Awesome. And I just love how you share so much of yourself and the anecdotes that I'm so sure that today's girls can still very much relate to. Just your transition from a neighborhood that was diverse, where you felt very comfortable, to moving to another community, more of a small town, I guess it was, and how there were few people that looked like you, and just having to make that transition and what that was like psychologically and emotionally. So can you share that a little bit for our listeners of what I'm talking, as much as you want to share, because we also want them to buy the book. So
yes, we want them.
We'll be right back after this. You love your kids. You do your very best for them. But sometimes it feels like it's just not enough. And you're so sure you're the only one who feels this way. The truth is, you're not alone. It is also true that there are some things you're doing quite right. And there's a community who would love to exchange ideas with you. I'm Carol Maletta, creator of the Parenting 411, a portal for parents where I share information parents need through webinars and masterclasses. And not only that, the parents there support each other on this amazing journey in the Parenting 411 community group on Facebook. I can't wait to meet you in the community. And we're back with the Parenting 411.
It's a great read for parent guardian along with their children. But the one thing that I noticed, that a lot of the things that I was experiencing, like being the only Black girl in my classroom, or, hearing young boys say, "You're cute for a Black girl," like those things really do impact you, but you don't always have the language to be able to say it, right? Or you feel like, oh, I am different than everybody else. Let me shrink a bit. And I didn't understand, and I couldn't articulate that back then. And now as an older self, I can actually go back and say, you know what, you already had everything you already needed inside of you. And you didn't need the validation just because some little boy in class didn't think you were cute. You don't have to latch your worth to that comment. Right. And I think part of that, having a mindset and understanding who you are, regardless of if other people see it or not. Some of us will never hear that in our homes. And I wanted that to be a place that they could hear it in the book. And then for parents who may not have come from homes where healthy communication was accessible, like talking with your children in a way that they can advocate for themselves, even if the outcome you still, lay down the law, but they can be heard, right? Creating these safe spaces. And so I really wanted to remind young girls that they have a voice. They just have to decide how they want to use it. And then their tribe, us around them, how do we cultivate that so that when they get to college or high school or the first job, that they understand their sense of worth, that they're not already shrunk by the time they get there, because I think it's so empowering. And this generation, as you know, Carol, they're very boisterous, about the way they. I think if we can cultivate that in a way, there's nothing that they can't do in their future.
Yes, and I love that where you talked about how important it is to advocate for yourself, even if the outcome isn't what you want. And I talk a lot about that with parents. I think the dinner table is just a great place. I was really blessed that we were able to eat dinner as a family most nights. I was really happy that we were able to do that. My husband traveled a great deal when they were really small, but by the time they were in elementary school, his work, he was an entrepreneur, he had more flexibility. So he was home, pretty much every night. And we had great conversations. And that's really the test lab for them to, really use their voices and realize that what they say has meaning. And, we had our family meetings there as well. And that's certainly a form where they didn't always get what they wanted, but they were heard. It makes such a difference when you're heard.
It makes all the difference because, again, like you said, even if the outcome isn't, if you're advocating to stay out a little bit later with your friends and you're say no, but at least you know that I have the ability to be able to advocate for myself, right? In this space, or if I go to my professor or teacher, that I'm not afraid to speak up because I'm in a space where my voice is valued, rather they value it or not. And so I think all these little things are so important because we talk about, as adults, imposter syndrome. A lot of that stems from, early development of how we see ourselves in that cultivation. And so those are just traumas that I don't want our young girls or boys taking into their next steps of life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now you had so many sayings that I really liked. Where was, oh, yes. So at the top of the list was the importance of having an empire state of mind instead of an enemy state of mind. Talk about that.
Yes. Man, I feel like mindset is so important. I realize that more and more every day because our mental health is so important. And so for me, oftentimes when in my younger life, I would be oppressing myself with my thoughts, right? You're not good enough. Why did they choose you for this? And that's a very enemy state of mind. And once I thought about, empire state of mind, wait, I could do anything. I can go anywhere. I can tell myself this. I don't have to wait for a coach to see it in me. I don't have to wait for a guardian to say it to me. And I think once we understand that we can pour into our own self, affirm ourselves, then we less that we're looking for someone else's affirmation. And I think as young girls, we're looking for so many other people to affirm us, right? And so learning to affirm ourselves will set us up for the future where we're not looking to other people to tell us that we're good enough.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, something else I liked as well was, I don't know if it was kind of just past the middle of the book, but where you were talking about friendships and just, there's something you said there. Oh my goodness, where is it? It was, does this friendship make me a better person? And can we grow together? And if the answer to these questions is no, then you have to ask yourself why you're in that friendship. And I think that, at a young age, it's just so hard to make those kinds of choices about friendships, and about deciding what kind of energy or spirit that you want around you, and deciding that this person doesn't bring out the best in me. I think that's so hard to think about when you're younger, but I'm so glad you included that in the book.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking about all the angsty teenage moments I had, and I'm like, you know what? At the top of the list were friendships, right? Because one day you could have someone as your best friend, and the next minute it's an enemy. It's the volatility of friendships. And I thought to myself, what about the people that make you feel alive, that add value to you, that you're not getting in trouble with? Like, these are not necessarily the people who are going to take you into the best pieces of your life, right? And I think sometimes we don't know, we're not taught what good friendships and healthy friendships look like. We're just taught, make some friends, right? But
Yes.
I'd rather have 2 quality friends than 10 friends who make me feel, insecure all day long at school, right? And so I wanted to remind, our girls that you could choose, you don't just have to settle for any type of relationship. But I think early on, and as I think about their futures, who they marry, who they date, they'll think about those things about, does this bring value, or, am I compromising? And I just wanted to remind them of, again, their worth.
I love that. I mean, because I actually did not consciously think that way until much, much older. I mean, I think between God's divine intervention, he moved me away from some people, but I maybe I didn't articulate it, or it wasn't at the top of my consciousness, but I just maybe drifted away. But it wasn't an active thing, active self-advocacy, or self-talk with myself that this person, they're not going where I'm going, or they're not, they don't make me feel good when I'm around them. And, I didn't have that skill set until much later, that level of introspection. So I love that, you're planting that seed very early with the girls. So now you talk in the book, and I won't go into great detail about that, but, different anecdotes about your experience at high school and all of that other thing. So how did it feel when you were honored by, your high school, and you went back and all of that? Talk about that.
Yeah, that definitely was not on my bingo card, Carol. I didn't think that was the thing that was going to happen. But, for those who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, I talked about the times where I didn't make the team, or I didn't get this or that, or people didn't see me as the obvious winner. And then more recently, my school awarded me a plaque that hangs in our high school as a distinguished alumni of our high school. And it's so funny, like when I was a teenager, I just didn't see myself as going anywhere. I'd see all these other kids who had all the things, their parents held these prestigious things. And I thought, wow, they're going places, right? I never really saw myself in those ways. And then I realized, actually, I have access. I can make good decisions. I can do these different things. And my road led me to becoming a distinguished alumni. And I kind of flex a little bit in the book and say, all those not making the cheerleading team, not making the basketball team, nobody brought that up when they awarded me that. Nobody brought up those failures. And the funny thing too, Carol, I'll add is just this year, it was one of my high school, what do you call it, reunions. I wasn't able to go due to travel, but I saw pictures in a Facebook group, and they were given a tour of the high school. And on the tour, on the picture, the video, my picture was on the wall. And I couldn't even imagine, because I haven't actually seen it at the high school yet, but it just reminded me that you are more than magic, Minda. You always had it, right? You always had it.
Yes. Are you in touch with any of your high school classmates, whether they're close friends or, just people you knew back then?
A lot of them follow me on social media, but there are maybe like 4 or 5 people that I grew up with at that time frame, that if they're in a certain city that I'm in, that we do get a chance to connect and stuff like that. So it's always real fun.
Yeah. So, in writing this book, what did it feel like to put yourself back in that place and relive some of those stories? Was it hard? How did you pull out the stories and decide which ones to share and all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny because originally I had certain stories I was going to tell. And as I started writing it, I thought other stories popped up that I had forgotten about. So it was reliving my high school, the good of it, the bad of it. I think I really enjoyed writing You Are More Than Magic because it is like a love letter to teenage girls, young girls, preteens. And I was so excited to write it for them because I thought, even if I didn't understand something at 13 or 14, it would resonate. If these young girls read it now, it's going to hit somewhere along the line. And I wish that I would have had some of this information. So for me, I was really excited. I think the hardest part to write for me was the Friends chapter because I ended up, when I was recording the audiobook, I actually kind of broke down a few times because a good friend of mine had passed away, and having to kind of talk about that again. But it was just a beautiful thing to say, hey, your friendships matter, right? So all of the things going back into it was just really joyous for me.
That is so interesting that you would say that because I released a book in 2020 on motherhood. And one of the chapters is love and friendship. And I forget which number that is right now, but it's later in the book. But I kept writing around that chapter. Like, I think it was the last one I wrote. And it was hard to write. I mean, once I wrote it, I think it was a good chapter, but yeah, that one was tricky.
It was tricky.
And talking about, I talked about it from the perspective of friendships of that mothers have, like with other mothers or their friends, even balancing that with motherhood, but also giving that gift of teaching your children how to love and how to be a friend, and really, honestly, how love and friendship are intertwined.
Absolutely.
So I totally get why that could have been a challenging chapter. So now, what kinds of forums have you been able to go to really talk about More Than Magic? We'll be right back after this. As the saying goes, mother's work is never done, except when it really is. I'm talking about my new book, Mother's Work, Pearls of Wisdom and Gems from My Journey. I share my transformation from an outmanned, overwhelmed mom of twin boys to a parenting strategist and consultant, and being honored as DC Mother of the Year by American Mothers Incorporated. In Mother's Work, I tell you about the 7 guideposts that kept me anchored as I weathered the peaks and valleys of motherhood. Grab your copy at carolmaletta.com/motherswork. And we're back with the Parenting 411.
Yeah, that's great. I hope to be able to talk about it more out there, but right now I've just been going to high schools. So I've been going to high schools to talk about it. And so, and Black Girls Rock, they're a platform. Some of the nonprofit entities that service young girls, I've been able to speak at some of those, like Girls Inc. and Step Up. So it's really been fun to connect with girl organizations. And again, I hope that I can get the book out more widely because I think it's a very special book and everybody should have it. And the funny thing is I'm having a lot of adults reading the book saying that my 16-year-old self needed this book now.
Yes. Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I want to share one more thing I liked. I mean, like I said, I have because I read it on my Kindle and I had pages of highlights, and then I say, okay, you gotta narrow it down. And so another one is later in the book where you just said that Black and brown girls, you're telling them people will always try to question our place in the world. That's their problem. We don't have to join them. And I just think that's so important for our girls to remember. Like we're already going to face, opposition. So don't oppose yourself. Don't succumb to that imposter syndrome like you talked about before. So what's next for More Than Magic, and what's next for you?
Yeah, well, again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you and your platform. It's very important. Continuing just to make sure that we get the books in the hands of our educators, of our young girls, but parents in particular. I think it's really important because we want to make sure that we're giving our best to the young girls in our life. And, some of the the tactics that and conversations that we might have had, a long time ago, we might have to have them a little bit differently with our girls now. And so, I hope that we're being open to hearing our children and our nieces and nephews out. And then my next book, or my paperback of Right Within, comes out later this year. And so just going back on book tour for that. So just full steam ahead in terms of continuing to remind every single one of us we are more than magic.
Wonderful, wonderful. And, I know how the power of words, the right words at the right time, can just have such a powerful impact on a person. So I'm just curious what you've heard or read lately that really resonated so deeply with you that you want to share it.
Yeah, it's something that it's from a 1970s book by an author named Toni Cade Bambara, and her book is called Salt Eaters. And I was recently rereading it, and there's a line in there that says, "Sweetheart, do you really want to be well?" And it hit me in a certain way, because I think, again, we talk about showing up authentically or being healthy or being our best selves, but that is a choice, right? And all the things that we allow in our space, our energy, that dictates if we're going to be well or not, right? If we're going to have the empire state of mind or not. And so for me, I constantly am asking myself when I'm making decisions, Minda, do you really want to be well? Because these things dictate if you're going to be well or not. And so I think that that's something that's really stayed with me. And again, who I engage with, what I do, what I write about, does it make someone else feel well too? And so that's always kind of top of mind.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, can you tell our listeners and viewers how they can follow you?
Yes, please go to mindaharts.com, and wherever you like to engage socially, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, find me there.
Okay, that's great. And I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. I highly, highly recommend, if you have a young person in your life, I just think they need to read this book. So please visit her website, find out how you can get the book. I don't know, I guess it's on Amazon too.
Yeah, so if you like to buy your books, you can get it. And it's on Audible too. So if you like to, or Kindle, however you like to read.
Yes, yes. I already know that I'm going to be ordering the actual physical book and giving it to a couple of people. So a couple of young people that I think will really benefit from it. So I'm looking forward to that and hearing what their impression is. And to all our listeners, please like and subscribe to the Parenting 411 podcast. Share this episode for sure, but also we have plenty of others that I know will be enlightening for your friends, families, members, and others who need a word of inspiration every now and then on this parenting journey. Please continue to follow me on the Parenting 411 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And remember that it is never too late to be the parent you want to be.